Hello, everybody, and welcome to another World of Warcraft live developer Q&A. My name is Josh Allen. I'm slightly too far to the left. Uh, what's up? So today we got lots of questions. Of course, Ian Hazakostas, game director, World of Warcraft, is here with us as well today. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. And first and foremost, I mean, new room, new backdrop. You know, people were speculating over the presence of a Jaina book in the background. Well, what could this mean?
Yeah, exactly. What could this possibly mean? It could mean that we're in our new studio, which I have not finished setting up yet.
So, it could mean that.
Visuals TBD. This is still a little bit temporary, but we are in our nice new studio space, which is soundproofed. So hopefully you will no longer hear people opening doors nearby. That'll be fantastic.
It's an exciting world in which we live.
Yes. Hooray for 2017. All right. So we got lots of questions picked out today. Just for everyone's awareness, we're not talking about WoW Classic today. That's just because we just don't have answers for pretty much anything at this point.
A lot of questions. Again, appreciate the enthusiasm. Love the discussion. It's a super fun discussion to have. We've all been really enjoying following that discussion unfold. I think, like we said, like Jay said at BlizzCon, you know, we're at the beginnings of this process. We are building a team to make this happen. We look forward to a awesome discussion, conversation with the community about what Classic means to you. And, you know, as we have answers, we'll be more than happy to share them in a, in a formal way. But, I mean, that said, also kind of like Jay said back at BlizzCon, we understand that, you know, when he says that some of you, your favorite flavor is vanilla, we know vanilla means vanilla. We know that it's about community, and that means some of the inconveniences, that means some of the rough edges. That's not something we're looking to move away from. It's more some of the questions like Jay raised. Which version of that experience? Is it the 2005 version? Is it the 2006 version? There were a lot of changes that happened during the Classic timeframe, and there's a lot of fun discussions to have as we figure out what the right experience is. So more to share in the future. Thank you for the passion. Keep the feedback coming. Keep the chat coming.
Yep, absolutely. We do, however, have lots of questions that we'll be answering about patch 735 as well as Battle for Azeroth.
Yep.
Which
so all of you who tuned in just to learn about Classic, you can, you know, I just saved you an hour.
You're not supposed to tell viewers to go away. That's not how. Anyway, all right.
There's going to be awesome World of Warcraft, Legion, and Battle for Azeroth information coming your way.
Yeah.
But no more Classic stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right. So let's get into this first question. It comes from Star Swirls, who asked, since tier set bonuses are going away in BFA, does this mean we're still getting 12 unique armor sets per tier, or is it one per class, or is class-based tier art going away entirely?
So I think going away is a strong word. I think we're taking a different approach for Battle for Azeroth. This is driven by a couple of things. First off, the Azerite armor system and the way that's going to interact with the Heart of Azeroth adds a lot of depth and customization to many of the same armor slots we've traditionally used for tier sets. Also, we've looked back and seen the role of tier sets and the place of tier sets change significantly over the years. I mean, way back, speaking of Classic, it was something that, you know, you might spend 4, 5, 6 months cobbling together your full 8-piece set, and many people never assembled it at all because you had to figure out, you know, which of the 3 hunters in your raid was actually going to go for their full set because there wasn't enough loot to actually get everyone everything they wanted. Those were long-term goals. Nowadays, with multiple difficulties, often we're seeing people getting their tier set bonuses within the first couple of weeks of a new tier. Whether they're going to LFR, whether they're going down a difficulty to cobble it together, then you're kind of locked into those armor pieces. And with more sources of loot and more parallel progression paths, anyone who's opened their Mythic Keystone weekly chest and looked at their character and seen like legendary, tier piece, these are just dead slots effectively. There's a whole world of items that are just gone effectively for consideration, and that's not a great place to be. So now actually getting back to the art side of the question. Another thing we're really excited about doing here is taking that same amount of art time, the same number of armor sets, and trying to create more variety that's accessible to more players with them. So, for example, in Emerald Nightmare in Legion, a lot of the armor that you saw were recolors or variants of the tier set of the tier 19 tier set, which you eventually would obtain later on in Nighthold. A lot of those pieces, when you looked at them, felt like they had no connection whatsoever to the Emerald Nightmare. You were going into that zone, you were killing corrupted monstrosities, and the loot that you were getting didn't really have a direct link there. And that's kind of how our raid armor has always worked for years and years and years. We spend all of our artist time making the class sets and then just sort of use recolors and variants on them to flesh out the rest of the loot tables. This time around, we want to go really heavy on the thematic origins of this armor. So, when you go into Uldir, all the loot from there is going to be cloth leather mail plate sets that feel like they came from this troll titan corrupted vibe, something very, very different in a very different direction we've explored in the past. Then if you move on to when we eventually go to face Queen Ashara, there's this whole sort of high elven aquatic vibe that we can capture there. And so in a world with transmog, we see today lots of people get their tier sets and instantly transmog them to whatever their favorite look is anyway. If you want that in the short term, if you want that iconic, paladin look, there are literally, dozens of options out there for you. But for Battle for Azeroth, while the mechanics of the system move away from, assembling tier set bonuses and focus more on customizing your helm and your shoulders and your chest, we'd like to take that opportunity to add a lot more art variety to the world, to have heavily themed nautical maritime Kultiran sets and Zandalari Troll sets and Alliance sets and Horde sets. And, in terms of appearances and differentiation, there'll be more options than ever before, as opposed to, our 22nd or 23rd take on Priest class fantasy.
Okay, sure. So kind of theming it, because we've had armor sets in the past that are sort of, like I'm thinking back to like Nex Ramus in particular, and some of the sets in Ulduar. Wrath of the Lich King also had sets that were still class focused, but they were kind of geared towards where you were getting them from.
A little, I think, at times that also muddies the waters a little bit. Like we've always ran into that. Like, how do you make a fel set for a mage that doesn't feel like a warlock set on some level, right? Or like there are blurry lines there. What's the old god themed paladin set? Good luck. And so I think this isn't a reduction in the amount of art that we're doing. If anything, it's an increase. But I think it's going to lead to a lot more variety that's accessible to a lot more people in the long run. And I think it's almost certain we're going to get back to class-based stuff further on down the line.
Sure.
But for Battle for Azeroth, this Alliance versus Horde, Kultiran versus Zandalari, etc. approach made sense to spread out throughout a lot of our armor art as well.
Okay. And sorry, just another sort of follow-up question on that. Does that mean that it's one appearance per armor type? So like one mail, one leather, one cloth, one plate?
Yes, that's the thought for a given zone, but there'll be more variety across different zones. There'll be more of those sets than we've seen in the past, and yeah.
Okay, so just kind of for Battle for Azeroth, instead of doing another like class-based set, we're just doing something that's like, let's make it themed about where it's from,
exactly,
and just giving a little bit more variety.
And it's the first time we're really giving our fully high fidelity raid armor treatment to non-class themed sets, right? With the full like added geometry, a lot of visual effects, more epic mythic versions, etc. So I think for the transmog fans out there, it's really going to sort of blow out the space that you have to customize your character and the variety of epic looks you can put together.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, frankly myself included, were initially hearing like, oh, so it's going to be like all those boring non-set pieces that have been in all the previous raids. But if we're like really putting that same level of
yeah, again, and if you look, if you saw the art panel at BlizzCon where they showed off Alliance and Horde themed armor sets, those are a couple of examples of that direction. Obviously, those are faction specific. You'd be getting those through PvP Warfronts, but imagine that approach carried through the different raid and dungeon sets, like like I said, Zandalari themed, Titan themed, Elven themed, etc.
Cool. Let's move on. This is one talking a little bit more about the actual bonuses coming from tier sets from Whiskey Jack OCE, who said, won't the removal of tier bonuses create less incentive for people to do raids? The removal/lessening of incentives typically lowers participation rates, and there is a concern it will impact raiding guilds in the future.
Definitely a valid concern. I think that's space. So two answers there. I think there will still be unique trinkets, things that are only available from raids that are very attractive, but also the Heart of Azeroth armor system. These are handcrafted items, and so there'll be properties that you can only find on, like, the helm or shoulders from the new raid tier when that raid tier comes out. That may be exciting, that may be special for your class. It's not the raw sort of stat power advantage of, sorry, if you only do dungeons, you just don't get this 4-piece bonus, but the
Right.
raider does. That doesn't necessarily make as much sense either in this world of parallel progression paths, but unique things that you can only get from raiding that are gameplay effects will still exist and will still be very powerful. I think ideally, there'll be things that people want from every sphere of the game. The person who's participating in a wide variety of content and doing so at a high level of skill and accomplishment will be the most rounded, most effective player, as opposed to, just this one path.
Okay. Yeah, I know as someone who does mostly just Mythic Plus myself these days, like I'm kind of looking at this as a positive for me, but I can totally see why a raider would be worried about it.
We understand. Like, obviously, the assembling 10 plus people, let alone 20 for Mythic, keeping that roster together, maintaining a schedule, progressing. There are large social burdens there, and there need to be unique rewards and incentives in order to make that feel worthwhile and properly rewarded. There will be.
Okay, cool. Moving on. Next question comes from Perculia. Hi, Perculia. Who asked, Patch 735 has a lot of content, but we mostly learned about it through scattered fragments in BlizzCon interviews. What's the TLDR on new features coming in 735? Off the top of your head, go.
Yeah, so TLDR, scaling worlds, epilogue quest content that tells the post-Argus, post-end Taurus story, Ulduar time walking. Down the line, there'll be a preview of our Battleground, our Silithus Battleground coming in Battle for Azeroth, and assorted little odds and ends, smaller changes, flavor stuff. That's kind of the general package. Yeah, but BlizzCon, we were obviously focused on Battle for Azeroth.
Yeah. There's a lot of that to talk about.
Get some info out there, but it would have been, it would have felt like a bit of a distraction to put in a main panel presentation, for example.
Yeah, for sure. Like if we were at BlizzCon, hey everyone, Battle for Azeroth. Now let's talk about 735. It's like, okay, yeah, people are going to be a little bit more interested in the new expansion.
And coming
obviously there's stuff in 735 as well.
And coming to PTR soon. Like quite soon.
Yep. Cool. Question from Gale Deep AD letters. Gale Deep in some letters.
AQW.
Thank you. In Legion, class identity was dealt with amazingly. Are there plans to do the same for races during Battle for Azeroth? Given the new focus on factions and addition of sub-races, it'd be a great time to expand inside rather than out. By the way, allied races, not sub-races.
Yes.
It's a different thing.
So allied races, certainly there is a lot of focus on their backstory, their culture, how they come in to join the Alliance or the Horde. They'll shed a lot of light there. But I think our focus this time around really is on factions, as you say, rather than the races within them. So the story in Legion was very much one of Alliance and Horde initially holding hands, going to the Broken Shore, working together to take down the Legion. You saw, Sylvanas covering Varian's back for a little while on the gunship. And that failed horribly. And that alliance splintered, the forces of Azeroth were defeated, and it was the class orders kind of forming building up and working on their own and beginning to cooperate down the line to solve this problem facing Azeroth because the Alliance and the Horde couldn't. Here, well, if this isn't about humans and dwarves and night elves working separately, it's about them working together, and that exists, and that is the Alliance. So I think that's the anchor here. Now, racial identity, I think, is an awesome place to explore in the future, and certainly as we venture to different areas of the world, if you're a troll, there's going to be a lot of really cool stuff for you in Zandalar, for example.
Sure,
we want to continue to do, and there could be that really race-heavy expansion down the line, the way we did class-heavy in Legion, but I would think of Battle for Azeroth as the faction-heavy expansion.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense, for sure. Let's just move on to the next question. Comes from Kasumi. This has been a popular question. Who asked, could you guys elaborate on what rep standing we'll need to unlock allied races? Will players be expected to go earn Exalted with the Nightfallen in Battle for Azeroth, for example?
There's no one-size-fits-all approach here. I think it's going to vary depending on the race, depending on the content. For the Nightfallen in particular, I think Exalted is required, but in practice, the way that really more works, we remove the rep barriers to the different campaign steps.
Right. And
so it's just play through the Suramar campaign, including the insurrections, play through the story of working with Thalyssra to topple Elisan's regime and restore, the Nightfallen to their proper place in that society, and then in Battle for Azeroth, you'll be able to carry that story one step forward and bring them into the Horde formally. So it's more story driven than grinding driven in in those regards.
Yeah,
But,
without those rep barriers, and because when Legion launched, and for quite a while after that, it was you've quested through some of this. Now you have to wait until you get like honored.
you have to do
go to the next
exactly. So
step.
you'd have to do world quests for a few days. That's gone now, and just doing the campaign will basically give you. It's not really possible to finish the full Insurrection campaign at this point without ending up exalted.
Sure.
Just because of the rep that you get along the way.
Okay.
Yeah, and then down the line, I mean, years from now, that's certainly something we could revisit and see. How does that feel? How does that make sense when you're in 2020 looking back at this? But for right now, it feels appropriate.
Okay. And like you said, it's not necessarily a one size fits all approach.
Exactly.
Other allied races may be different. Question from Shadow Silver, who said, "Will we be able to race change to an allied race, level one of that race to 110 to get the transmog, and use the armor on the race change character?" So I guess kind of talking about two characters here, one of which is like your main that you've race changed to an allied race that you've unlocked, but then you go and you level one of those to 110 to get the transmog. Can you then use that transmog on the other character?
That's the general thinking now. That basically transmog is generally account wide. This would be a race restricted appearance. So once you've earned, let's say, the Dark Iron Dwarven heritage armor, any Dark Iron Dwarf can use that. But I mean, that's our current thinking. Could change, but I think that makes sense now.
Okay, similar to how like if you earned the challenge appearances in Mists of Pandaria on a Warlock, you can use that on any Warlock on your account.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Question from Quady, who asked, are there plans to make sure that all classes on both sides of the conflict will get more race options with future allied races? So probably talking about Demon Hunters and Death Knights.
Well, okay, so that's potentially yes. Or, if you are, an Alliance player and you're looking to be a Druid, the three allied races, none of those can be Druids.
Sure.
So I think there's two parts to that. It's something we're mindful of. I think first and foremost, we're looking at what races are cool and make sense story-wise, timeline-wise, to come into the Alliance and the Horde, and like it's a system that we can add to in the future. So, and then from there, once we've picked the races, we're looking at what classes make sense for that race, given their nature, given their identity, given their culture. But I think that's over time something we're going to keep in mind to make sure that there are options there for people with given classes. Now, Death Knight and Demon Hunter are kind of special cases because they're both hero classes. There's a mix of gameplay where they both start at a very high level, and part of the nature of allied races, certainly at this point, is they start at level 20. But also storyline, timeline-wise, Death Knights were raised by the Lich King.
Right, yeah.
Demon Hunters are explicitly ancient elves that were imprisoned in the Vault of the Wardens.
Specifically Illidari.
Yeah, exactly. So like that complicates things a bit. That's not to say it'll never happen, but right now the focus on allied races is that level 20 starting experience and that journey through the world.
Okay. Next question from Pashio, who asked, will other hunched races, such as Darkspear Trolls, Undead, Worgen, and to a lesser extent Tauren, get the option for an upright posture as well? So in the Q&A panel at BlizzCon, the question was asked, I forget exactly what the question is, but I remember Chris Robinson.
Character customization, basically.
Yeah, and
Chris
Robinson was saying that orcs will finally have the ability to just stand up straight, which you go to. I thought it was really entertaining. You go to a barber for.
Yeah, the barber can also do plastic surgery.
Yeah,
if you don't like, if you want your jaw removed on your Forsaken, he'll happily do that for you.
Chiropractic.
There's some sketchiness in that barber shop, but look, just give him some gold.
I mean, they are usually goblins on the Horde side, at least.
Fair.
I guess half the time they're gnomes on the Alliance side, so you can. Anyway,
yeah.
Other hunched races, are they going to get an option?
I think they need to stand on like crates or something to make that work. But so hunched races. Orc was the big one, really, because from the very beginning, there were examples, notably Thrall, and then we've seen, a new model for Saurfang. We could look at some examples of orcs that didn't have this posture. And canonically, they were there, and that was something that was a repeated, frequent request, and something we wanted to deliver on as a result, because it made sense, totally understand the desire. For Darkspear Trolls, for example, I think that's sort of that posture, that gait, that sort of gangly, lanky, hunched look is part of the troll silhouette. It's part of what they are pretty universally. Zandalari Trolls, for example, are upright. They have a different posture, a different overall demeanor about them. And so, there's certainly allied race options down the line that could explore those spaces. But right now, I don't think we have an option to add posture customization to a broader variety of races. This really felt like something that made sense and was a specific thing for orc males right now. But it opens the door for many more customization options down the line, which we're really excited about.
Yeah, definitely. Like, even though we don't necessarily have plans right now, the idea that maybe even for a future allied race that could be implemented,
exactly.
we could have different options like that.
Yep.
So that's pretty cool. Question from Skullbera, who asked, will all of the Zandalari Troll Druid forms be based on dinosaurs, or just their travel form, which was confirmed to be a raptor at BlizzCon?
Just the travel forms. So I think it's your combat forms. They're very specifically, they're a cat, they're a bear. There's a ton of things that reference and hook into that, both visuals and animations, and the name and theming of a lot of your abilities. It's feline, such and such,
Right,
and tiger roar, etc. That's just the kid of the druid. So suddenly turning that into a raptor or some other dinosaur variant, I think, would be at odds with the rest of druid identity. The travel form thing just felt like a really cool hook for, it's like, all right, there's a very close connection between the Zandalari Trolls and the dinosaurs, as we're going to see as we explore that subcontinent.
Yeah.
So we're excited to be able to do that.
Okay. Moving on, next question from Agamotto, who asked, what is planned for the honor prestige system in Battle for Azeroth? Will we still need to grind for our honor talents, or even have honor talents anymore?
This is something that's still under discussion, so I don't necessarily have a super satisfying answer right now. We're talking a lot about this internally. I think I can say that it's not going to be, we're going to add, 30, 40 new prestige levels, and a new player coming back who skipped Legion, coming back to battle for the first time, is going to have like 55 prestige levels to get if they want all the rewards. That's not the system we're trying to create here. We're looking at how the feeling of progression with the honor talents played out in a lot of ways in the long run. Once everyone's established, it starts to feel like a barrier to entry, where you just have to operate with a penalty for the first, X hours in PvP until you've fully unlocked many of the talents that are considered, optimal or most desirable for your class or spec in arena or battlegrounds. So I think we're reevaluating a lot of things on that front. Regardless, we want to make sure that the prestige awards that are currently available will still be available in whatever form we have in the future. We'll have more information to come, basically.
Okay. Cool. Looking forward to that personally quite a bit. Next question comes from Thun, who asked, will artifact skins be locked to the spec they're from? I'm not a healer, but I really enjoy a lot of the resto, shields, and maces, and would like to wield them as elemental after Legion.
I think current thinking is that, yes, they will be spec restricted. So you only, resto, mace, Scepter of Ashara, that's only usable when you're resto.
Okay.
Not when you're elemental or enhance. Those appearances are very, very closely tied thematically to specific specs.
Okay. Next question comes from Miss Shaw 1217, who says, will artifact appearances earned on my current 110 Hunter be available for Transmog on my new Void Elf Hunter in Battle for Azeroth? So if you've unlocked an artifact appearance now, and then you make a new character to level up to 110 for the Heritage Armor, are you going to be able to use those artifact
I would expect that, yes. Okay. I think they're spec restricted or class restricted, as the case may be, but they're account-wide. And Transmog is, by its nature, that.
Cool. Question from XOX Pinkamina XOX. Okay. Who said, with the announcement that legendaries will not return in BFA, and that the medallion will be a sort of replacement, does this mean we will not see any of those glorious orange items at all?
Certainly far fewer than you saw in Legion. We don't, I think we're open to the possibility of legendary items as they've existed in the past, whether there's a incredibly iconic item that is associated with a certain raid boss or a certain source that feels like it should be orange as opposed to epic. It's somehow special and unique in that regard. We'll do that where it makes sense, but that's, I think that's a very different thing than what we had in Legion. And nothing, as of now, we don't have any specific ones in mind. So the answer may be 0. The answer may be some small number.
Okay. So, not sure yet whether or not we should be looking forward to finding 5,000 shards of Varian to piece back together into.
Probably not. Maybe individual Vol'jin ashes, though.
Oh,
And we just
yeah,
have
yeah.
to- Anyway,
Piles of Vol'jin dust. We're terrible people. Next question comes from Chewy, who said, can we get 10-man mythic rating, please and thank you?
no plans to change the mythic raid size at this point. I think managing a mythic roster is challenging. Managing any raid size is challenging, and that's been a struggle for guilds throughout the history of World of Warcraft. I think when it comes to mythic, again, sort of to restate some of our prior reasoning here, there are two questions. First, should mythic raiding be flexible size? And certainly that would be the easiest for roster management, but we feel like flex size rating is incompatible with the cutting edge tuning that mythic is all about ultimately. And despite our best efforts, tuning for a single raid size is hard enough. We've seen some of our missteps there in Tomb of Sargeras. It's inevitable that there'd be some fights where 16 was the best, and some where 20 was, and some, if you went higher than that, where 25 was, or whatever. And the last thing we'd want to see is the expectation that in a competitive group that's trying to excel, the right thing to do is to sit a third of your raid for the next 2 weeks of progression, because that's the best way to win, and a bunch of people just sit on the bench or anything along those lines. So if it's not flex, then it's, I think, a fixed size. And if it's a fixed size, what's the right fixed size? And the value in 20 is that it allows for representation of a wide variety of classes. We can assume that you have most classes present, and thus most tools available in those toolkits. We can split the raid up in more ways. We can handle more of the complex coordination that makes mythic encounters unique and uniquely demanding. And going down in size, I think, would limit a lot of that possibility. I think the reality is, if we announce tomorrow that, okay, we're going to do 15-player mythic raiding, let's say, that would be, seen that would be godsend for the group right now that's fielding 18 or 19 and having to cancel raids. But not too long in the future, you'd see, if someone has a 22-player roster today, your roster is going to shrink over time. You're not going to be able to sustain having 7 people on the bench on a regular basis. People will move on over time. You're not going to replace those who leave because you're still over full. Before you know it, now you're down to 17 or 18 showing up regularly.
Yeah.
And then all it takes is a couple of people who get busy at the same time. Someone gets sick, someone's computer breaks, and you're here with 14 people asking, "Oh, could you reduce the raid size to 10?" And that's just it's a struggle, right? You have to constantly be recruiting, and that is one of the very great challenges of running and maintaining a raid guild in World of Warcraft. And kind of touching on the earlier question about incentivizing raids, it's part of why we agreed that it's very important that that effort be rewarded, and that seem worthwhile, both in terms of cosmetics and titles and prestige, but also power where it makes sense.
Yeah, so you're basically like thinking back, like when it went from 40 to 25 in Burning Crusade, like I can remember back then we were like, oh,
Yes, we'll never have raid attendance problems again.
Yeah,
this is going to be easy.
Yeah, exactly.
And then,
we've got way too many raiders. This is great. Now we've got 35 people showing up for raids, and instead of being 5 people short, now we're 10 people over. But then as time went on, that turned into okay, crap. Now we were the best 24-man raiding guild on the server for quite some time. And then it went to 10 or 20 man, and it was like, okay, great. Now we're fine again. So I can see the desire to not just constantly keep shrinking the raid size, because before long you end up with 1-player mythic raiding.
And I think there's value in stability and consistency. At this point, it's been the same. We've had the same raid structure for the entirety of Warlords, the entirety of Legion, and looking ahead to Battle for Azeroth, we're planning to continue it. And people can have stable expectations around that structure and make decisions based on it. And there's value in that as well. That said, one thing, we would like to explore ways of opening up cross-server mythic raiding a bit earlier in the process where possible. I think we're mindful of concerns around server first. We want to protect that competition, especially in smaller servers where those may take a while for those to get filled. But that may help groups that are trying to find backfills, trying to fill out a 20-player roster, have more options. That's something we'd love to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually, because when you think about it, when a raid first opens, that's usually when a raiding guild has their best attendance because it's the brand shiny new thing. But a few weeks into progression, or even like after you clear it and you're farming at that point, that's when people start to sort of drop off. So
And there
cool.
are also cross-server raiding groups that are doing heroic, and they maybe spend 3 months or so clearing through heroic, and they have
Just
20
waiting.
plus people.
Yeah.
But then they hit a wall effectively because they can't continue on to mythic. That doesn't seem right either.
That could be interesting. Let's move on. Next question from Netherial, who said, how does the team feel about the overall difficulty for Mythic Tomb of Sargeras? And will Taurus be tuned similarly, or does the team feel that Tomb of Sargeras was a bit too difficult?
I think the team feels that Tomb of Sargeras was a bit too difficult on Mythic specifically, and the last third of the instance specifically. I think Mistress, Fallen Avatar, and Kil'jaeden specifically. I think Heroic and Normal were fine. And we've talked a lot about this in the past. I think some of this is it's challenging, hitting a tuning point that's right on what the cutting edge are capable of, that will be challenging enough to allow the best skills in the world to differentiate themselves from each other, because that's our initial goal when crafting this content. Nerfs are common. Nerfs will happen. I think I would expect that at some point I don't know what they're going to be, but I can promise that a few months after Taurus comes out, there's going to be some nerfs to Agrimar or Argus the Unmaker on Mythic difficulty.
Sure.
And that's to some extent how the game has been forever. Bosses tend to get nerfed a bit once the cutting edge have sort of planted their flag, staked their claim as the best in the world for that next tier of guilds that's getting there later on, that isn't necessarily stacking all the optimal classes for it or whatever else, but still wants to have a fun and satisfying experience. So there's two aspects here. There's tuning, and then there's also the feel of how mistakes are punished, and that's something that's more broadly applicable that we do want to improve from the start. I think having too many binary checks and instant pass-fail mechanics over the course of a fight, that can be frustrating, and that can really wear on you regardless of the difficulty level, regardless of where you are in the progression. It always, I think, generally feels better where mistakes are punished in a way that's going to doom you in the long run. You can only get away with so many, and you need to play well, but you still get to feel like you're improving and experiencing the fight along the way, versus everything was perfect and then one person made a mistake at the 4-minute 30-second mark of the fight. The whole raid's instantly dead. Did the whole raid learn anything there?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's room that, again, there will still be raid wipe mechanics. There's still some of that, but that's a balance we're going to be much more mindful about striking.
Yeah, I remember you're giving me flashbacks to Heroic Ragnaros again. Back in Firelands, where it was all right. We got to phase 3, and that guy still doesn't know how to kite a meteor.
Or one person stood 1 yard out of position in the magical triangle formation. And your safe spot got blown up, and the fight's over. And good luck figuring out who it was.
All right. Well, that's too painful. We're gonna move on. Next question coming from Faith, who says, "Is a Mantles vision going to be personal drop only, or an item drop that can be assigned via master loot?"
So, okay, this may be a controversial response, and apologies. Actually, I think my answer to this is you'll see in 2 weeks. And part of that is I just want to push back a little bit against the idea that everything needs to be known and fully understood and analyzed and dissected ahead of time. I understand from the perspective of a raid leader, a master looter, you're trying to figure out your priority system, you're trying to figure out how that's going to work. You want to plan in advance to some extent, but the reality is I'm not sure that it's going to affect what you're doing today or tomorrow all that much, whether you know this or not. And I think there's value in preserving some discovery. I mean, I think in an ideal world, I wish we had a way of making fewer things data mineable so that we'd go into a raid and encounter rewards that you didn't even know existed at times, and have that moment of surprise and excitement. There are technical reasons why that's challenging, but I think there are places where I think we'll try to draw lines and not over-explain, not share everything. There's a community that's wonderful at analyzing and dissecting and explaining how things work under the hood, but sometimes magicians want to keep their secrets and their tricks. That said, obviously there are places where advance notice is important, right? If some reward is going away, if something's not going away, if we're going to have a new currency, if people have asked us, are you using the same bonus roll tokens for Taurus? Yes, we are, because those are things that can affect your current planning, and we're not trying to catch people off guard or give people unpleasant experiences in that regard, where you wasted some resource that you wish you hadn't once you learned something different. But here, go into Taurus, explore the zone, defeat the bosses, and when you reach the reward at the end, you'll see how it works.
Okay. Yeah, I can just, thinking back to my raid leader days, I can imagine people being really, really worried about, okay, a Mantles vision just dropped, and we haven't put any thought into this yet, and who do we give it to? And trying to have that conversation in the middle of the raid night rather than having it in advance. I can see why people would want to be having those conversations in advance.
Yep. To be fair, if that happens and it does drop, by definition, you will have defeated the final boss of Taurus, so you're not facing time pressure.
Oh, okay.
To rush on to the next boss.
Fair.
It'll be the end of your raid night.
Fair. Okay. Let's move on. Next question from Sharny786, who said, is there going to be an increase to the Mythic Plus cap with Taurus as there is with every other raid?
Yep. I think those are systems that we see, advancing in lockstep. So as with past raids, the way this will work is when Mythic Taurus opens, so December 5th, whatever week past the 28th is. I want to say the 5th. Whatever that week is. Anyway, that week, when Mythic unlocks, you'll be able to get Mythic rewards from dungeons up to Mythic 15, and credit for your weekly chest will be retroactive. So basically, if you want to be optimal, do a 15 during the first week of Taurus, normal heroic. You won't get a better end-of-run reward, but your weekly cash the following week will have a higher quality item that will be comparable to Mythic Taurus loot, and that's how it'll be for the rest of the tier.
Okay, cool. And yeah, it will be, I was just checking the calendar, it'll be the 5th for North America, Latin America,
6th for Europe, 7th for Asia.
Europe, 7th for Asia. Yep, cool. Next question from Cornetto, who asked, will Titan Forging still allow you to get Mythic quality gear in normal raids in Battle for Azeroth? The ever-present Titan Forging question.
I think so. This came up with the BlizzCon Q&A. Yes, we plan to carry forward the Warforging Titan Forging system. I think, while and for reasons of continued progression across an entire raid group, moments of surprise and excitement, I think there is value there. That said, so a couple things. While you can still get that lucky normal drop that is competitive with Mythic gear, the Mythic Raider is, in basically all cases, going to be better geared than the Heroic Raider or the normal Raider. And that's what actually plays out if we look at the gear levels of players in the live game today. The person who's actually clearing Mythic Tomb of Sargeras is better geared across the board than the person who's doing Heroic, even if the Heroic player may have one or two specific pieces that are comparable or even better in those slots than the Mythic Raider. That said, we do feel like Titan Forging probably happens a bit too frequently now. I think the odds are something we're to look at there. And part of that, it's when we hear about guilds that feel like it's the right thing to do to always go back and clear old raids, or to do, even with us unifying rewards like Artifact Power to be a single drop, regardless of what difficulty you do it on, they're still going back and doing Tomb on normal, let's say, hoping for that super lucky Titan Forge. That's a problem. And that's
right.
If it feels like that's what's being incentivized, that tells us the system is tuned incorrectly. And right now, I think it can often feel like, certainly across a raid, if you're doing a full clear, you're probably very likely to see a couple of Titan Forge pieces and a couple of highly Titan Forge pieces along the way. That leads to that feeling that, oh wow, odds are actually, we are probably going to get a 930, 935 item if we do this heroic clear, so we should do it. That's more problematic. So that's something we'll be digging into. But the idea of upward scaling reward quality is something we are carrying forward. Yes.
Okay. Have you ever considered, I'm sure you have, the idea of having Mythic drops able to Titan Forge to be slightly higher than, or having Mythic drops, sorry, I'm saying this incorrectly, Mythic drops drop at a level where lower tier Titan Forging doesn't surpass it? So like if something drops 930 on Mythic, then you can get a max of like 925 from Titan Forging elsewhere.
Capping the Titan Forging, I think, is a suggestion that we've heard. I think the diminished odds as we go higher and higher effectively have that as a softer cap.
Sure.
But I think, if we did that, the heroic raider, for the person who's just doing heroic and is working on Avatar, they're working on Kill Jaden, a hard cap on Titan Forging that stopped it from encroaching on the mythic space would actually very tightly limit the potential for further progress there and what could actually happen. So I think, yes, I think we've considered, but I think the space of anything can happen possibility is one that has value to it.
Yeah.
Beyond, and again, I get the psychology. I understand how you feel as a competitive arms warrior warrior of any spec, looking to, get those orange parses on Warcraft logs.
Yeah.
When you saw a tier ago, the, socketed Titan Forged Raid Finder Draft of Souls, and part of your soul just dies.
Yeah.
But that person literally won the lottery, right? It's like, and that person, the rest of their gear is probably nowhere comparable to that.
Yeah.
And you're looking at something that, was just this extreme outlier. We could put very high caps to stop that from happening, but the reality is, like, that's stopping the memes and stopping the Reddit posts and the Discord chat, and it's not actually affecting the average player.
Sure.
And so
it
really the question is, do you want us to kill memes?
Well,
moving on.
I certainly don't want to kill memes. Next question from B. Pritchett Jr. says, speaking of killing things, why are you killing world PvP in an expansion focused on faction wars? So we're killing world PvP.
Yep.
We're killing memes. We've already killed Vol'jin like 5 times or something. Yeah. What? How are we killing?
We're on a great
PvP?
run here.
Yeah.
We're not killing world PvP. Actually, I think we see this as an exciting time for world PvP. We want to revitalize world PvP. And as discussed at BlizzCon, I think there's 2 sides to that. That's creating a space where players who are looking for world PvP can more reliably run into each other. Many of those players are stuck on wildly faction-imbalanced realms where it's an anomaly, feels tremendously lopsided, and that doesn't happen all that much. Also, having a world where all players, regardless of their server type, can opt into a world PvP environment means that we can actually create global world PvP content in a way that we couldn't before. I think in the past, anytime we had some cool idea for an outdoor PvP system, or devoting a chunk of a zone or some set of quests or a large swath of content to world PvP, we always ran into the question of, well, what does that mean on PvE servers? What does that mean for the millions of people who just don't get to do this content at all? The only way they could would be to pay for a server transfer and or leave their friends. And that tended to kill a lot of those ideas. So while we want to give people who feel stuck on a PvP server the way to opt out of that gameplay if they no longer enjoy it without, again, having to leave their friends, we see this as, really, I think World PvP has a very bright future in Battle for Azeroth. We're very excited for the potential of it, and it's something we know we need to devote more resources and effort to balancing. And, it's never going to be, we can't balance the 3-on-1 gank, but we can improve the feel of the combat so that it's not, one-shotting and two-shotting, and doesn't feel broken.
Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting potential there for things like just balance tweaks here and there. Like, okay, when you're PvP flagged, then that maybe activates your, thinking in Legion terms, activates your honor talents, but turns off your legendary procs or something like that.
Potentially, though, I think, I'm honestly, this is kind of off the cuff, I'm not sure we would do that, because you're still in the outdoor world. You're still, like, you could just be questing, you could just be doing PvE content while open to the possibility of getting into those conflicts. But we could make modifications to rule sets, such as, for example, what if you couldn't mount for X seconds after getting out of PvP combat when you're on a PvP-enabled server, such that there isn't the, get on your flying mount and escape the second something goes wrong possibility open to you, so that it's easier to track people down, to pursue, and to keep engaged. Things like that we'd feel uncomfortable making as global changes to the entire world for all players, we can do when it's an environment where you're opting into this gameplay experience and there's some structure to it and some incentive for it.
Okay, cool. That's super cool. Another question here from Agamotto, who asked, how will PvP server changes affect RP PvP realms? Recent changes to RP server phasing seem to be misaligned with a new direction of PvP and PvE realms. So this isn't even just RP PvP realms that are wondering about this.
Yeah,
all
just
RP realms.
RP realms in general.
Yeah.
I think current thinking is, so we recognize the very great importance of community to RP servers in particular, and that's something we've turned off the CRZ behavior and sharding by default on RP realms. Obviously, you can still manually form groups cross server, but we want to allow events. We want to allow organization and community to flourish. And looking at servers like Emerald Dream, obviously there are very active PvP communities there. So the current thinking is these are not incompatible. You could be on a server, an RP server, and opt into PvP, and you would do that, and you would see other opted into PvP people from your server.
Okay.
And it would still be the default behavior of RP servers don't automatically, split people up or bring in people from other servers.
Okay.
Obviously, we may need to reevaluate that in the long run if it turns out that on some servers
like it's splitting people too much,
or there isn't enough critical mass, and actually players, if we get to a point where people on RP servers are asking us to do this, then we'll look into it. But our default position is we don't want to split up RP communities, and we don't want to mingle multiple RP communities together because that often has the same harmful effects.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I think hopefully they'll make a lot of people who are playing on those servers happy. Question from Benny521, who said, since Battle for Azeroth will finally be PvP heavier, will raiding capitals be more rewarded, or do you plan anything to encourage players to kill faction leaders?
I guess a couple things. First off, Battle for Azeroth will be an awesome expansion for PvP, but I don't think of it as a PvP expansion. I think of it as the next chapter in World of Warcraft as an awesome all-around expansion that is going to have love for, new battleground, new arenas, world PvP improvements, and more. That's it. Yeah, raiding capitals and those achievements, I think it's a place we were talking about. I think we don't have a great specific plan to discuss yet, but there's definitely something cool about the idea, especially given the broader story that we're telling here of an Alliance army showing up at the gates of Orgrimmar with a bone to pick and being able to see that play out more often the way you sometimes did back in the day. Okay.
Cool. Next question from Ezralis, who said, what are your plans in regards to class changes for Battle for Azeroth? Many specs, Demonology, for example, did not like the direction their spec took in Legion, and from what we heard at BlizzCon so far is that there will be few class changes.
Okay, so we'll have a lot more to share on this in the future as we begin to sort of ramp up our beta for Battle for Azeroth. But just in broad philosophical terms, a few class changes I don't think is an accurate description. Certainly fewer than in Legion. I think Legion was probably the expansion that changed the most about WoW classes in the history of World of Warcraft by a large amount. In literally tons and tons of specs had their entire rotations changed, dozens of abilities removed, dozens of abilities added, hundreds in fact across the board.
Yeah.
We're not looking to do something on that level. Change is very costly and very disruptive, and it's jarring to come back and feel like something about your spec has fundamentally changed. That said, given the amount of change we did in Legion, it's inevitable that not all those experiments were successful.
Right.
And I think Demonology Warlock is one that we would classify as not a fully successful experiment. There's something cool about the fantasy of the Master of Demons summoning that has an army of demons at your command and uses them to blow up your enemies. There's something less cool about the execution of significant ramp-up time and a maintenance-y feel that actually doesn't make you feel all that empowered. It's more, you're just trying to juggle a bunch of stuff and worry about that. So Demonology, I would expect to see a pretty significant rework in the next expansion. Survival Hunter is another example there. Where there are people, it's awesome to offer the Melee Hunter possibility. That's something we're still committed to, but the execution of that fantasy can use some work. Now, beyond that, there'll be a couple of other specs, but across the board, we're certainly looking at talents for everybody. We're looking at, whether it's dead talents that no one takes, really sort of very binary, uninteresting choices like the pure single target versus pure AoE option, where you feel like you need to switch those back and forth between encounters, otherwise you're not really effective or competitive with other people. That's not interesting. That's more just a hurdle that you have to clear. And also, in the aftermath of the artifact weapons, we're certainly looking at what gaps are created by those abilities no longer being present and how we should best fill those gaps.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So it's kind of like, in terms of class changes in Battle for Azeroth, maybe a good analogy would be sort of the like Wrath of the Lich King to Cataclysm sort of transition there, where the systems were all relatively similar, and some classes got some pretty, or some specs got some pretty heavy changes, but there wasn't like, we're going to go through every single spec with a fine-tooth comb and completely rework everything from the ground up.
Yes, minus the addition of 3 new abilities for everybody, and
Sure,
minus
yeah.
removing 20 points of talents from everybody.
Yeah.
But yes.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah,
we
went from 51 point
Yeah,
trees in
yeah.
Wrath to 31 point trees in Kata, and pick your spec at 10, and yeah,
this game's been around a while.
we change classes a lot, and I totally get people who are frustrated by that and just wish we'd leave the damn class alone sometimes so you can just play the game.
So speaking of leaving the class, that's a bad transition. Anyway, Awful Lawful said, with the return of raid buffs, will we see classes gain raid utility back, such as Retribution having Hand of Sacrifice?
I don't know about that specific example, but certainly Ret has Hand of Protection, which is awesome, or Blessing of Protection, really, which is awesome utility, very valuable. Those are the sorts of things we want to continue to maintain and expand where it makes sense. And it's not just a raid thing; it's also dungeon utility. Whether it's I think Shroud of Concealment coming back to rogues in 7.1, and us seeing in the Mythic Dungeon Invitational and in Mythic Keystones on a regular basis how awesome it is to have a rogue for that reason. I think the more you can look at your raid composition or your dungeon composition and be happy that there is an X present, because that means you have some benefit. It may not be a specific buff or a debuff, it could also just be utility. Having Death Grip, having someone who can Death Grip in your group when it's Sanguine Week is a really big deal. Having someone who can Death Grip Shadow Souls on Kil'jaeden is super useful, or in any number of fights. And that's not formal raid utility in the form of Hand of Sacrifice, but it's unique tool sets that set specs and classes apart from each other, and that's a space we really want to explore a lot more.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, like I can even think of little examples like in Court of Stars, if you have a Demon Hunter for the end bit, that's like obviously that's a very niche example.
Demon Hunter or Protection Paladin.
Oh yeah, that works as well. Question from Isara Shanai, who says, are there any plans to build some artifact traits into spells come Battle for Azeroth, like Mobile Trank for Resto Druid? So you kind of mentioned this a second ago, but...
So yes, but it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. We're not just automatically porting everything forward.
Sure.
Some things may become baseline, some may be talents. As players might have seen, players at BlizzCon who played Elemental Shaman in the demo, for example, probably noticed that Stormkeeper, the current artifact active, is an available talent in the Elemental Shaman talent tiers in Battle for Azeroth. This isn't an official statement, I guess, because this decision hasn't been made, but Mobile Trank is actually something I would favor not carrying forward. I think that it's a great quality of life boost. Of course, you're used to being able to move around, and I realize that for those of you who remember Symbiosis and had a pet Resto Shaman back in the day, you also could do that. But Trank is an incredibly powerful cooldown. There's a part of using it, I think, is actually that restriction of... Yeah, you have to pre-plan it to some extent. You have to plant when you're doing it. Resto Druids are already super mobile in every other aspect of their gameplay. Now, we obviously just Trank maybe need to become even stronger in some cases where there's this drawback to it, because there's some cases where there's heavy raid damage going out, but you actually wouldn't be able to safely Trank without being able to move, potentially. But strengths and weaknesses, I think, are a better place than talenting out of weaknesses, such that there are no drawbacks and no interesting decisions. And I think that's one of the comparisons of Healing Tide Totem versus Trank, right? Healing Tide Totem, Shaman can run around and do whatever they want to do while it's down, but it probably should be weaker than Trank, because Trank has the other restrictions of being an ongoing channeled thing, and even more so if you can't move during it. Of course, all of what I said, who knows, we could end up rolling this in anyway.
Sure.
But from a full philosophical perspective, a lot of the quality of life improvements or things that remove drawbacks, specifically removing drawbacks to abilities, is one of the areas that we are most hesitant to entrench as a permanent part of the class. I think they make for cool set bonuses, they make for cool traits because you get to cheat a little bit, you get to break the rules. But once it's permanently that way, well, part of interesting gameplay in using that ability has now gone forever.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like when the drawbacks aren't really substantial, then the strengths can't really be substantial either. It has to just still kind of
again,
even out.
And we want these abilities to be good, but I think it's given the choice between removing weaknesses or improving strengths to offset those weaknesses, I think we tend to favor improving strengths as a way to make more interesting and diverse abilities.
Okay. Moving on. Next question here comes from Enika Huntress, who asked, what's going to happen with Hottie for Beast Mastery Hunters? It would be sad to lose the skins, but also the extra pet with a story behind it. It just felt right for the spec.
Yeah, I think Hottie is very closely tied to Titan Strike. I don't think that's something that's going to be carried forward as part of BM in perpetuity. Again, certainly for someone who didn't play Legion at all and comes back to Battle for Azeroth, it's odd to either require going back and getting this thing or having this mystery extra bonus pet. That said, there's something very cool about having multiple pets as part of the feel of Beastmaster, and one of the things that sets Beastmaster apart from other hunters, both in terms of how you're playing and just visually when you see one. And so that's certainly something we could expand upon more.
Who asked, will we see updated Warlock animations by the end of Legion, or will it be around Battle for Azeroth? So we mentioned a while ago that we are working on updated animations for Warlocks. Any idea on the time frame for when we can get those?
So I think, improved animations, visuals, that's an ongoing process that we don't see ever really ending. Warlocks are something we're working on. I think that will likely be around Battle for Azeroth, at the launch of Battle for Azeroth in that pre-patch.
Okay. Question from Towering, who asked, with the new old zone leveling scale, will you make older zones more relevant for the end game content, like world quests or more time walking? So, like, are we going to have Desolus world quests or something like that?
No immediate plans to do that, at least not in 7.3.5. But having that tech in place certainly opens that door, gives us the potential to do it when it makes sense in the future.
That could be cool. Almost out of time, so I'm just going to keep moving through questions. Question from Ilko Land, who said, Legion's relics helped even out the massive power difference of getting or not getting a weapon drop. Will Battle for Azeroth go back to pre-Legion weapon drops, or will there be a new relic-like mechanic? So kind of the idea of, I finally got my weapon to drop, that's a big swing upward in power, or it hasn't dropped, I've been waiting for it.
So the flip side is, I think I've also heard feedback from a lot of folks that relics diluted the excitement of getting a weapon drop and getting a weapon upgrade. And so I think that's a bit of a double-edged sword, so to speak. But yes, I think the plan is to go back to weapon drops that drop in their entirety. But that said, compared to the old days, there's so many more sources of loot now. I think when people reminisce about frustrations around weapons, it was often looking at a raid tier and saying, well, there's 2 bosses in this entire tier that drop the 2-hander that I need, or drop the dagger that I need on my assassination rogue, or the 2 daggers I need. And every week I only have this one chance and this one moment of frustration when it doesn't drop.
Right.
Nowadays, we have the Mythic Keystone system. We have other opportunities to get those items. So there's a broader variety. And so it's more maybe you might want the perfect weapon that has the stats that you want on it, but fewer people will be in a situation where they just can't get a dagger of item level X to help, no matter what they do from any source.
Okay. Got time for 1 or 2 more. Question from Zeron, who asked, what's going to happen to our beloved Underlight Angler come Battle for Azeroth?
Unlike the other artifacts, I think our current thinking is to carry the Underlight Angler forward. Our artifacts, they have an important purpose ahead of us to serve, but it's not clear that a fishing artifact falls in quite the same category when it comes to the story. So we'll see how that unfolds.
Okay. Question from Bimidi, who said, with the increase to the amount of characters per server limit, will we also see an increase in the character per account limit?
We were planning to increase the number of characters per server as when allied races roll out. And that's in case you're at the current max, you have 12 characters in your server, you want to make a Zandalari Troll, you want to make a Dark Iron Dwarf. We don't want you to have to delete one. So that is why we're doing that on that level. I think the 50 per account limit, that's less of an immediate concern, frankly. I'd be curious, to hear from folks who have 50 characters that are actively used and that couldn't be deleted if needed. That's a very, very high number. I think that's more than pretty much anyone actively plays based on our data. And that number exists. Just that we need some database constraint so that we know that there's an upper limit to how much storage is required per individual player playing our game. And that's not a number we're currently planning on changing, but open to feedback as to why there's a compelling reason to do so.
I'm sure there are people out there who saw the 50 character limit and took that as a challenge.
I'm sure there are absolutely people who have 50 characters, but how many of those are the character that you made who's level 7 on your friend's server that you just made to say hi one day?
Sure. Yeah.
But you haven't played in 3 years.
Yeah, totally. All right, well, that's about all the time that we have for here today. So thank you very much for joining us here in our swanky new temporary studio. Well, it's not temporary studio. Yeah. It's temporary dressing, but
pleasure as always.
Yeah, thank you very much. Reminder for everyone, the World of Warcraft 13th anniversary event is actually going on right now, so be sure to check that out, log in, do stuff. There's all sorts of fun little goodies hiding around in there. I've heard tales of some dragons that may be in need of killing.
There are some dragons. There's a lot of transmog that you haven't been able to get in quite some time for those of you who are interested in such things.
Yes, awesome. So thanks again, everybody, and we will see you guys next time.
Yeah. Until then.